Wait a minute. Winnie the Pooh has Wednesday. Wednesday. Wotan's Day. Odin's Day. Oh my god. Welcome back to Super Saturday, where we kick off our training shoes and vehemently not be dry this winter. As Thor intended. I'm Shifu Pain, and it's a common joke that in terms of mythology, eventually all roads lead back to Odin. Just like how everything in media eventually leads back to Kevin Bacon. Yes, it seems that the All-Father really does have his finger in every single mythological pie there is. The Greco-Roman tradition of syncretizing their existing gods with whatever culture they were contacting links Odin to Mercury, aka Hermes, also with Thoth of ancient Egypt, Lu of the Celts, and to the concept of the Wild Hunt, or Odin's Hunt links Odin to the concepts of the Hayaki Yago of Japan and the Ghost Rider, not to mention a certain holiday figure. Despite the fact that the Poetic and Prose Edda, two of the only sources for Norse mythology that we have, date back only to the 1200s, it seems that Odin is far older and far weirder than any of us ever thought. Myself included. But to fully get a grasp of what Odin is and where he came from, we need to do some history. 4000 BCE is when we find Indo-European settlers coming to the lands of what is now Scandinavia, arriving from the Caspian Sea and the Russian steppes. Wait, does that then mean that Odin is Russian? I'm afraid that it is not likely, comrade, but that is not the end of the story. It wasn't until 1000 BCE that something resembling Nordic culture started, when a community broke off from the Indo-Europeans and began developing their own language, culture and religion. This is when we get the starting point for Odin and company, with the Iron Age for Scandinavia beginning in 500 BCE. Write that down, as there will be a test. By this time, Scandinavia began a trading relationship with ancient Rome, which eventually led to this guy named Tacitus writing the Germania, a text all about this new culture that Rome had begun to trade with, and what Tacitus also wrote about was the gods that culture worshipped. And so finally we get to talk about Odin. Because we have solid clues stating that by this point, Odin, Thor, Frigg and Tyr all existed and were recognizable, despite the syncretism that was going on with each god being paired with a Greco-Roman god. And so we finally have Odin written about, codified, where we'll finally be able to have written sources for both him and his friends far-reaching throughout history, and that is the end of that. But not for long! As it turns out, either the Norse forgot to write anything down, or these writings were destroyed, or they were unreadable for a long time, because we don't actually have a solid book-worthy pile of myths and stories about Odin and company until this guy named Snorri Sturluson writes the Prose Edda in 1220, and then someone else, whose name escapes us as we don't know it, collects a series of poems from this, the Codex Regius, making the Poetic Edda in 1250. And with that, we finally have a collection of myths, fables, tales and stories all about Odin and the gang. That's it. No loose ends, no end highs. That is it. That is the end of that. But not for long. Because Snorri, remember him, well, he was a devout Christian, who inevitably changed things to suit him as well as make it more palatable for the then Christian Scandinavians. And without any other sources, we don't know what's really Norse and what is Snorri being naughty. Not to mention that there is over 2000 years we are utterly clueless on. So what do we do? Well, why don't we take a look at the character of Odin and see what clues we can get from that. Odin, or as he is otherwise known, Wotan, Woden, Wodan, Wudan, or Wutan, is the All-Father, basically head god in charge of the Aesir, that being those from the realm of Asgard. He's a god of war, poetry, magic, wisdom, death, and a bunch of other things. Hey, dude's gotta have a hustle, and a side hustle, and a side hustle. Odin, or Wotan as he was called until the Prose Edda popularized the name Odin, was also worshipped primarily on Wednesday, or Wotan's Day, much like Thor on Thursday, Tyr on Tuesday, Frigg on Friday, and Mani on Monday. Wait a minute. Winnie the Pooh has Wednesday. Wednesday. Wotan's Day. Odin's Day. Oh my god. I said Odin was a god of magic, but more specifically he deals in runic magic, which he became an expert in after hanging himself from Yggdrasil, the world tree, stabbing himself in the side with his spear and dying for 9 days, with his spirit plumbing the depths of the 9 realms for knowledge of runes before rising again on day 10. I'm guessing the book on runic magic was outdated. Odin is more of a loner and regularly goes on quests for knowledge, disguising himself and tricking the wisdom out of unsuspecting people, making him more of a trickster archetype than other head gods like Zeus, Ra, or the Big G. Given how Odin does this regularly and has a link to Greece, I have the mental image of Odin sneaking onto Olympus, like wearing Groucho glasses. It's obvious it's him, but he thinks it's a brilliant idea, searching around for how they make their alcohol or something, when Zeus or someone notices him and he starts thinking, damn it, I should have brought Loki in on this. Odin also has a habit of leading a cohort of spirits or souls in the wild hunt, a ghostly procession that flies through the night, which would typically be a signal of war or battle, but more than often this hunt would be the reaping of souls to go to Valhalla, a hall for the honored dead who would wait there as the Einherjar, an army that would fight for Asgard when it turned Ragnarok o'clock. Speaking of Ragnarok, Odin was very paranoid about that and wanted to avert certain parts of that prophecy as much as humanly possible. The best example of this being the myth of the Fenris wolf. At first the wolf giant lived in Asgard, cared for by Tyr, but Odin knew that the wolf would be the one to kill him when the end times came, so he convinced the other Aesir to trap the wolf giant, which they all eventually agreed to despite the fact that Fenris hadn't actually done anything yet. They tried chaining him up multiple times, turning it as a game to see if the wolf would break out of them, before finally commissioning the dwarves to make a bind out of impossible materials. By then, the wolf giant had grown wise to what they were doing, so agreed to this last game on the condition that Fenris could bite off one of their hands if he could not break free, which Tyr agreed to. The bind worked, and so Fenris bit off the hand of the one god he thought he could trust. As a response to this kind of betrayal, Fenris swears he will kill the All-Father himself, ensuring the prophecy in that classic twist of fate that always happens when you try and mess with future shenanigans. Now, what's so relevant about this story, aside from it creating a straight through line to the finale of this whole thing, is that it creates a very weird link between Odin and Tyr, which doesn't at all seem weird until we look at the history of one of the things Odin is most known for. Fulvark runes have gone through a lot of changes and development, more so in what they represent, but broadly there are 24 symbols, all representing different things, ranging from ordinary domestic things like seeds, wagons and torches, to parts of the landscape like water, trees, the sun, livestock, but the rune that is the most interesting is this one, Tioaz, which broadly means warrior, soldier, truth, justice and all that, but what it also represents is Tyr. And what's interesting is that this is the only rune that makes reference to a god or member of the Pantheon, which is weird considering how Odin normally gets credit. And more to the point, where's Thor? Frigg? Loki? Well, that question then leads into another one. Why is Odin the head god in charge? While, sure, we have evidence that he's been around for a long time, and by the prose edda he's in charge, was he always? A line of thought which is aided by how there are some interesting similarities between Odin and Tyr. Both are war gods with some connection to Fulvark runes, but the Fenris wolf myth in particular is striking because it frames them as moral opposites. While Odin acts as a paranoid tyrant, punishing the innocent for things they haven't done yet, Tyr is portrayed as a friend who commits an act of betrayal through complacency, and then performs an act of sacrifice by allowing Fenris to take his hand, something which he knew would happen as he knew Fenris would not be able to escape. These mysteries only get compounded by this, the Meldorf brooch, an artifact dated to around 50 AD, and seems to have something approximating runes on it. But the weird part of this is that it was found in northwestern Germany, unlike other artifacts which were found in Denmark or Scandinavia. More interesting is that this artifact is older than any other artifacts found, with general consensus being that Fulvark runes did not develop proper until the 2nd to the 8th centuries. So what is this? Some theories speculate that either this writing is runic, proto-runic, or Latin in a runic script, which carries the idea that runes are actually based on Latin. But unfortunately, we can't speculate too much as we just don't know yet. All we really can say is that the history between Scandinavia and Rome is far more wide-reaching than we at first thought. I mean, it is entirely possible after all that culture was also affected as much as trade. So what conclusions can we draw, and why is Odin the head god in charge? Because this is not a case where Odin and Tyr started as one god and became two over time, as both are referenced in the Germania. Whether Odin and Tyr were at first one entity but then split before the writing of the Germania is something we don't know, as we don't have any records before that. But what we do know is that Mercury, or Hermes, was a very significant symbol for the expansion of the Roman Empire.
And so with this popularity, Odin or Wotan grew in popularity as a result, eventually causing the overtaking of similar gods like Tyr. So it's entirely possible that the runes thing started as a Tyr trait, but became subsumed by Odin as time went on, with Tyr still being represented in Tiwaz. What about the Fenris wolf? Well, this feels to me like some reminiscence of that vying for the top position, with one being painted in a morally positive light while the other in dark.
But considering how we haven't played the biases of Sturluson and the missing context of the myth before it was officially codified, we really don't have a lot to go on after this. We'll probably never know the whole story. All we can say for certain is that the history that exists between Odin and Tyr is far more wide-reaching and far more significant than we at first thought. Either that, or all the caffeine and protein has finally gone to my head and I've finally gone loopy. Thank you for watching this week's video, and in the comments let me know what your thoughts are on all of this. Do you think there is more to this than at first meets the eye? Could Odin and Tyr have been one entity at some point? Will I be in a padded cell next video? Well, I don't know, but until then, thank you all for watching, and until next time everyone, peace be with you.